pull the printed copy off, have the violator sign it, and at the end of the shift, he dots the handheld device and it downloads into the system. Now, as I understand it from our court clerk, she has to manually data entry that citation to 4 different softwares. This system here will automatically download it into everything, and she will not have to do any manual manipulation of a citation 4 times. So it will be a great labor savings on her, as well as improving, I think, see, by shortening our time with the violator and enabling the officer to keep his eyes on the violator during the traffic stop instead of busying himself with penciling out a citation.
Any questions of Roddy? Tommy, you're muted. There we go.
Yeah, here we go. Roddy, are the printers mobile as well?
Yes, the printers are mobile as well, Tommy. So they'll have the car will be wired for their installation. The printers will be taken in and out of the vehicle as needed, just like the handheld devices. And I might add to it that Montique has done a little investigation on that. Laverne has the same system, correct, Montique? And that the law allows us to charge $5 per citation of a guilty plea or found guilty in court. So I think $1 of that goes to the general fund, and $4 of that goes to a special fund that would allow for the maintenance and purchase of more equipment. But I think that's a 5-year window on that $5 charge. I see Bob shaking his head.
Yeah, that's correct. I've reviewed their ordinance. It's well done.
Yeah. So that would be a little cost saving for us there.
Say that again, Roddy.
Sorry?
Say that again. It's a 5-year window. Say that part again.
You're only allowed to charge that $5 per citation for a 5-year period. Now, I don't know why that is, but Bob might be able to speak more to that than I can.
I think it's an effort to recover some of your cost of implementing the electronic program. I think this is the wave of the future. But I think it's a cost recovery thing, and I don't think they want it to be treated like a tax, a permanent tax, something like that.
I would have mentioned also that there's a $1,700 annual fee if we buy into this program. $1,700 annual fee.
The funds that I have that I've proposed to use, if I may, we have $6,800 left over in our THSO grant that's undedicated yet that we can spend towards this. We have $7,600 that I was able to save out of our capital towards the car purchase and build. And then we have several thousands of dollars of unused salary money because it's just been hard to find officers here. So that would be about another $10,000. So that's altogether $24,800.
Bob, have you reviewed this 80-something page contract? I skimmed over it, but I certainly didn't read all of it.
Believe it or not, I did, and it was very tedious, and a lot of it's technical stuff. And to say I understood all the technical electronic jargon, I can't say that, but the contract itself is fine. And I think this is a source. Correct me, Roddy, but isn't this the source? It's on Sourcewell. It's kind of approved governmental.
Yes, it is on a purchasing contract. So Brentwood uses this system, and then Montique says that Laverne's about to go to it as well. So,
Roddy, will it be any training cost involved? I saw something near the end about them recovering some expenses. Is that in additional to the $24,000?
I couldn't speak to that, Tommy. I don't know the answer.
I think I saw that. I think if they had to do like travel here from wherever the source is or whatever, you might have to compensate them for that. But I'm not sure the training couldn't be done online, really.
And
That's what
probably,
go ahead.
and probably right now with the virus thing, that'll probably be how we'd have to accomplish that. So
How does the experience for the person that's been pulled over change?
it shortens our time that we've got them delayed on the side of the road.
Does it
We
give them
can
any
get-
additional online capabilities or anything? Could they pay a ticket there immediately, scan a thing? I'm just trying to understand the whole breadth of this thing.
No, my understanding it would be no, Derek. We wouldn't be taking any money or any charge cards on the side of the road. I don't think that would be proper or legal either.
I mean, it basically just prints them the ticket that your officers are writing now, correct?
Yes,
Basically.
yeah. Basically, the handheld device, like I said, scans that barcode that everybody has on the back of their driver's license, populates the ticket, the citation with their information, and then the officer has them sign it just like they would any normal citation and send them on their way. It's probably going to cut our time on the side of the road in half easily. So.
Well, with that, I make a motion that we approve resolution 20-18.
We're not
Yeah,
voting,
second.
are we?
Do what?
We're voting tonight?
This is a
I
special
think you're
call
voting
BOMA
just-
meeting.
Just for the purchase, we would have to do an ordinance for you to vote for the $5. So that would probably be next meeting.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I have a copy of the ordinance, that's why I have a copy of the ordinance here, so, okay.
Wendy, I'm like you. I was confused at first, but I looked how the meeting was called, and it's called as a BOMA special call meeting, not
Special
just a
meeting.
workshop.
That's my impression, Tommy. Anyway, I make a motion. Do we have a second?
Okay.
Second by Larry? Okay. Other discussion?
Yeah, just one last question. So somebody does this give us somebody pulled over the ability to pay the ticket online? Or do we already have that capability?
I think they can
we
do
already
that now,
have the
Katie.
capability.
We already
Okay.
have that.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Nope.
All in favor of resolution 20-18, say aye.
Aye.
Pass unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ryan. From there, next item on our agenda, by the way, we have three
Mayor?
items.
Mayor, you probably should adjourn the special BOMA meeting and go into the beer board.
Well,
You
I
mean
can go
workshop.
into, yeah. I
It's
think,
not. I don't think we need. It's not advertised as two separate meetings. I don't think.
Well, we don't have a special meeting for the, I intend for it to be a special meeting for the discussion of the budget. This says discussion. Same thing with the town administrator, just says discussion. So I think we can adjourn our meeting, right, our special call meeting, and then take up these other items.
I think they're two separate things.
Well, it's not advertised as two separate things, Bob. I mean, it's got item 1, resolution, item 2, discussion of fiscal year budget, item 3, discussion of town administrator.
Oh, okay. So it was drawn up to include the budget workshop.
Yeah,
on the
that's the way I read it. What about you,
But
Wendy?
that's a
Derek?
workshop, Bob. We
I don't
can
have it in
continue
front of me.
like
but I
this,
looked at it. I did see it mention the budget workshop.
but that's a discussion.
Monteith, did you put it on as an agenda item for the BOMA meeting?
I did.
Okay. Well, then I don't think you have to adjourn it. I think you can continue on. You just can't vote on the budget tonight.
Can't vote on it because it's
Yeah.
discussion.
But I
Right,
think
okay.
it's just as part of the meeting.
Okay, we've gotten beyond our first item. The second item we have with us the Budget Committee. I see Jason Patrick, who's the chairman. I see Tommy, who's vice chairman. I see Jeff Mucci. He's in a different part of the house, I guess. And I see Kaylin smiling. That's good. Julie, you with us?
You're muted,
Julie.
Julie.
Julie?
She
Okay,
plus her
she-
mic is muted.
There she goes.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm sitting here with Christina.
Okay, Christina.
Hey,
Do you have
everybody.
your picture? Do you have your picture up there with Christina so everybody can get a picture of what she looks like?
No, because we don't have a webcam on this computer. We're at the office.
Okay, everybody say hello to Christina. She's our new
Christina.
finance director, and I'm very proud of her. So we'll continue on. This is a meeting to discuss the fiscal year budget 2020 and 2021. Budget was basically crafted by our budget committee headed by Jason Patrick. I'm very happy with what they did. They took about an $800,000 deficit and sliced it down to about $250,000 deficit. They did a very good job. We took it to BOMA for first reading. And the one thing we added, I think, was a proposed 30-cent property tax increase. And that was voted on by all the members. And I think that's where we stand right now. We're poised to take this to a public hearing in May. So we now have the budget committee with us, and I assume that there's a couple members of the board that would like to ask questions or opinions from the budget committee. So with that, we can start out with Tommy, who told me that he thought this was a pretty good idea. So Tommy, we'll start out with you if you'd like.
Yeah, and I'll just start out by saying, I think you mentioned I was the vice chair, but I think Jeff is. He beat out
Okay.
Caitlin in a scientific
I'm
rock,
I'm so
paper, and
accustomed
scissors.
to you being vice mayor, vice chairman.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah,
too accustomed to.
Jeff beat out
Yeah,
Caitlin
maybe
in
you
rock,
gotta
paper,
start
scissors.
out.
And I'll just basically turn it over to, and it's actually a 15-cent increase instead of a 30. And I'll just turn it over to Jason, I guess.
All right.
15-cent increase, bringing our total to 30, right?
That's correct.
A couple of things, and thanks for including the budget committee tonight in your discussion. There's been several things that have obviously happened since the last time we met. The situation continues to be pretty fluid in terms of looking at how long we're at home, when we're going to reopen, how does the reopen, what does that look like, how does that affect the numbers, and the numbers seem to be changing quite a bit, and I'll let Julie speak to that in a moment because I'm sure she's keeping a tight watch on the latest estimates that are coming out. But there was an interesting article, Impact of COVID on Local Government Finances by the Howard Baker Jr. Center for Public Policy. And I went through and read this report that they produced and made a few notes on some things that I thought were interesting points. First of all, most forecasters are predicting negative GDP growth, US GDP growth between somewhere -10 to -35%, and unemployment to reach somewhere between 8 and 32%. That's a pretty wide margin. I can say from research that I've been reading lately, the estimate in the second quarter being somewhere around 30%. If there is a second wave of infections later this year, then we could see additional damage to the U.S. economy. The majority of those that are studying this and producing research on this see positive growth beginning in the fourth quarter of this year or the first quarter of next year. And the depth of this recession will exceed both the Great Recession that we experienced in 08 and the Depression, the difference being it will be much shorter in duration. I think most of that can be attributed to the fact that we've come into this recession much healthier in terms of our economy, also in terms of the consumer. I would say also in terms of our banking system compared to where we were in 08. The economy wasn't terribly healthy, the consumer wasn't terribly healthy, and the banking system was in a much different position than it is today. So I think that aids in the recovery process once we can get to the other side. We do expect to see a larger drop in revenues in the third quarter than in the second. That was a point that was brought out in the report. And on a fiscal year basis, 2020 will weather the storm to some extent because of the timing of things. But we expect the first 3 to 6 months of fiscal year 2021 to be particularly challenging. The second half will provide some needed relief, but we would not anticipate positive revenue growth in fiscal year 2021 relative to fiscal year 2020. And then they broke down different areas of revenue that a municipality would receive. The first being sales tax. And they said sales tax is where we will see the most significant negative revenue impact. And the story should not be nearly as bleak for property taxes. So a couple of thoughts as we head into public comment and second reading of the budget that we've proposed. First of all, referencing back to what the mayor said, when we started this process, our first draft, March 15th of 2020, we had budgeted expenses of around $4.5 million. And we cut those down to 3.963 million. So we cut roughly $561,000 off of the budget in terms of expenses. In terms of revenue, we cut about $300,000. And Julie, if I hit a number here that's incorrect, I think I'm correct, but please jump in. But compared to last fiscal year, or the one that we're currently in versus the one that we're budgeting for, we reduced our budgeted revenues by almost $295,000, $294,882. So by the time we went through the different variations of cuts in the draft budget to expenses as well as cutting revenues, we still end up with a shortfall of $254,856. A couple of things that have that have been on my mind since we met last are this. One, it appears that we're continuing to receive guidance lower on state shared revenue, number one. Number two, from the various reports I'm reading and other information I'm receiving, I don't think we really have yet a full grasp of how this is going to affect sales tax, revenue, once we come out of this in the third quarter, in the second quarter, but really we're talking about third and fourth quarter with this budget. I think something that BOMA probably needs to take a hard look at as we go through public comment and the second reading is, from a revenue perspective, have we done enough to prepare for what we're in the middle of right now? Now, in addition to that, something that we've learned since the last time we met was that it appears that we will be eligible to receive a one-time grant from the state. And I believe that amount is about $228,000, if I'm getting the correct information. And it appears that that money can be spent on a one-time expense, correct? So not salaries, not recurring expenses. I think the state offers a list of examples like a road project or a facilities project or something to that effect. So that certainly will help. It doesn't address the recurring expense issue, but it does help bridge that gap. So 3 things: the grant that we now know about that we didn't know about before. Secondly, in looking at what the state is saying, maybe looking at what other municipalities are saying. For instance, I know the county in their most recent budget meeting, which I think all budget committees right now are kind of revisiting their numbers now periodically. I know they have said from a revenue standpoint and expense standpoint, I think or at least from an expense standpoint, they're staying flat from what I can gather from the county. Whereas we're basically flat. So we're pretty much in line with them. We actually have about a 1% increase over our budget last year in terms of expenses. But I think everybody's trying to get their hands around how much do you reduce your expected revenue based on what we're in the midst of. The last thing that has come to my mind since the last time we met, strictly from a budget committee perspective and trying to make the numbers work, which I want to get to recurring expenses versus recurring revenue again in just a moment. But I know right now the town is going through the potential of looking at a charter change. And part of that charter change, from all the information that I'm reading and everything that I can gather, and from watching the workshop that y'all held with MTAS and Alicia, is that there is the potential to have an, no pun intended, an impact on the impact fee. And, I don't know that I have a firm grasp on exactly what potentially would happen with impact fees. But from what I gather and what I'm reading and what I'm hearing, it seems like it's more likely than not that we would not be able to have an impact fee under a different charter. And Bob could probably speak to that better than I could. But right now, the impact fee accounts for roughly 31% of our revenue. So I think as the board goes through the discussion of budget, as we go through public comment and second reading, I think the things that need to be at least discussed are, from a revenue perspective, do we need to sharpen the pencil? And Julie, I'd love to get your comment on this as well, based on projections we're seeing. Number 2, how would the potential of impact fees affect things going forward? And the reason I bring that up is this whole discussion started with property taxes, an increase in property taxes. Well, if you're going to start having a discussion around what you should increase property taxes to, I think at least contemplating or discussing how other revenue that we receive might be affected by the decisions that are being made right now in the town, how that would affect your property tax decision. Because I think the two definitely go hand in hand. And then lastly, to my recurring, I said I was going to come back to recurring revenue versus recurring expenses. The trend that we've seen, we have seen over the past few years is that our recurring revenue, not our one-time revenue, but our recurring revenue continues to not keep pace with our recurring expenses. And I'd have to take a look at the most recent budget, but the draft before this one, in looking at the difference between the two, I think we were still running about $800,000 lower in recurring revenue than we were in recurring expenses. And we've been very fortunate with the impact fee and adequate facilities tax and permit fees and the like. That's been very helpful, helping us to meet our budgetary needs. But at some point, we have to address the fact that our permit situation will change, our impact fee situation could change, and as new development either slows or we begin to build out, all of that's going to change. And then we have to be able to rely more heavily on recurring revenue versus one-time revenue. Julie, those were the thoughts that I had in terms of the discussion tonight. Is there anything in there that I just completely tripped over, or that you would add or clarify?
No, I think you hit on all the important points. When you talked about the recurring expenditures exceeding recurring revenue in the proposed fiscal year 21 budget, it's about a $1 million shortage. So
Okay.
recurring expenditures are exceeding recurring revenue by about $1 million in the fiscal year 21 budget.
Okay. At the time that I did my calculation, I think I was trying to back out some of the capital purchases and vehicle purchases and things, IT, software. But I think you're exactly right. We're right around that $1 million mark, 800 to $1 million mark on any given year in terms of budget.
We basically cut out all those non-recurring because there are no equipment like police vehicles. The only thing that's left in the budget is $10,000 lawnmower for the zero-turn mower for Public Works,
Mm-hmm.
the IT audit,
10,000.
and I mentioned this to you earlier. No, we're doing a website now. I think there's one other thing, but we cut out all those other non-recurring capital expenditures because that's like a wish list and we couldn't afford them.
Right. As far as the deficit that we're looking at for this year of $254,000, I think the board would obviously have to decide. We have reserves set aside to be able to cover that deficit. I know article that came out recently in the Tennessean looking at Metro. They have a very, very, very strong, healthy reserve fund that they've set aside that they anticipate they will be utilizing this year to cover some shortfall. And my expectation is we would probably do the same thing. Those are my thoughts. I'd welcome any questions or comments, but just to recap, it's the, have we done enough in terms of, Julie, that's the question I was going to ask you. What's the latest you're seeing in terms of guidance on revenue? Are they continuing to offer lower guidance?
They have not offered any lower guidance than what MTAS had issued in April. I mean, I had read the same article that you did from the Baker Center, but MTAS, actually provides the estimates or some estimates. And I did put that in a email to the board. I'm trying to look at the numbers.
Was it around $126, I think, total?
Yeah, well, they lowered the general fund estimate by $10 per capita.
Right.
And we had already been kind of, on some categories, we were lower than what they had estimated. In some categories, we were higher. But overall, it was still going to be that we budgeted a little bit more than their lowest estimate at this current point in time. And I'm trying to find that email. I emailed it on April 7th. Trying to look at the numbers again. Yeah, but that's the latest guidance is that, and we did not change the budget based on that. we
Right.
still had it at the amount that we proposed in the first reading. Because it was gonna be about only 50,769 in total for the general fund, lower.
Okay.
But that's if, if we think the guidance is still gonna go lower, then we're already kind of behind the 8 ball with that.
Right.
One thing I did rerun the numbers at 30 cents property tax versus the 15 cents would, let me see. It would make our excess revenue over expenditures number for the general fund be 447,376. So instead of the 254,856 deficit, just doubling the property tax would give us a 447,376 excess revenue over expenditures. And that's because the property tax would double, but then our trustee fees would also double. So it's not the net difference. You have to take out that increase in expense as well. It's not just doubling the revenue. There's going to be a corresponding increase in expenses. But I just wanted the board to know, since they had preliminary voted on 30 cents, how that would affect or impact the budget.
And that's assuming that revenues stay at the current guidance.
Correct.
And they don't revise those lower.
Correct.
Okay. The last thing, so I've talked about revenue and where we're currently budgeting revenue, and if there are any adjustments that the board would want to see made with regard to revenue. Secondly, with property taxes and the discussion around how much you raise them and what you base that on, I brought up the fact that when we look at our overall, all of our sources of revenue, I think the property tax discussion has to also include what may or may not happen later this year with impact fees. And then lastly, and it's something I brought up in the last meeting, and that's looking at future capital expenditures, one-time expenses, not recurring expenses. I know that our Williamson County Commissioner, Beth Lothers, sent out some information today to the board and was kind enough to include me in that email, basically talking about there's a real opportunity for the town to participate in some joint projects with the county to do some things like improve our parks or even add parks or improve our recreation center. There's been, discussion of, do we look at some type of indoor pool facility or additional park space in another area of Nolensville, or basketball courts or things of that nature, anything to add additional services to the citizens. So just like we did with the rec center, where we partnered on that. Oh, also the library, expansion of the library was another thing that was discussed. So I think there's some opportunity there as well. And the reason I bring up a capital projects budget, or the different ways that we receive revenue and how that will be allocated, is I know there was discussion in the last meeting about dedicating certain cents of any type of increase to specific budget items. And I guess my only feedback that I would give on that, certainly that's a board decision, but I guess from a budget perspective, when you start looking at the difference between recurring expenses and revenue, or the potential loss of future revenue, or the potential to partner with the county on some pretty exciting potential projects down the road that we could be a part of that would really improve the amenities and the services to the town, I would just caution the board to be very careful in dedicating certain cents to certain things, because sometimes there can be unintended consequences, and there may be other areas where any additional revenue would need to be directed. And if you've dedicated it in certain areas, that's going to obviously limit what you can do. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and let the board do their thing. Tommy, you started it. You kicked it to me. I guess I'll kick it back to you.
I was just going to ask if Jeff or Caitlin's got any comments or want to throw out anything.
I'll go. I have lots of comments. I won't necessarily mention all of my comments right at this moment. I think we'll kind of have to have a little bit of a more of a dialogue on several of these topics. But one thing that I think we need to keep in mind is that we should budget for what we know about. So one example would be the $50,000 in guidance from the state for the sales taxes that I think Julie said it was $50,000 lower than what we already have. I think we need to adjust our budget to account for that $50,000 decrease. At the same time, we're also getting another $229,000 in one-time state funding. So I also think we need to revise the budget to account for that additional money as well. To Jason's point, there might be other areas that we need to take another look at based on information that we know today that we didn't know a few weeks ago. But I do think that there's room to revise the budget based on these known elements. There's also elements that are unknown that Jason had been talking about. One thing is the impact fees. That's very much unknown for several reasons. One is that only becomes relevant if the petition is successful, and then if the petition is successful, if the voters vote for a charter change, and then if the voters vote for a charter change, if it in fact becomes known that we are not able to continue collecting impact fees. Right now, we don't know one way or another. Certain people think we will be able to, certain people think we won't be able to, but at this point, that doesn't even matter because that's not even our current charter. So I think we have to operate under the charter that we have, not the charter that we may or may not have. It's certainly something to keep in mind, but the decisions that are made related to the property taxes should be based off of what we do know about today. Those are a couple of things. I also want to talk about the issue of recurring expenses versus non-recurring expenses. I have a different opinion than Jason on this, and that's fine. I think it's good to have different opinions on a board. I'm not saying that my opinion is right and his opinion is wrong. I'm just saying that they're different opinions. And like I said, it's good to have different opinions on a board. When it comes to the building permits, it's been discussed that these are non-recurring revenue streams, so we shouldn't use these non-recurring revenue streams to fund our recurring expenses. And I agree completely with the concept of you should use recurring revenue streams to fund recurring expenses. You should not use non-recurring revenues. I think it's a little bit of a gray area when it comes to our building permit revenues because for two reasons. One is because we do continue to get building permit revenues year after year after year. And not only that, our building permit revenues generate revenues of a different type. So every time you build a house, now you have additional property taxes from that house. You have additional shoppers who are going to spend their money in Nolensville. You have additional businesses that are going to want to come to Nolensville because of an increase in population. And you also have an increase in revenues that we get from the state because the state revenues are based off of population count. And so for any one given year, those additional revenue streams that we bring in are going to be less than the one-time building permit revenue. But those revenue streams that we get in after the fact, those happen year after year after year. So what we have is one revenue stream that you might say is non-recurring that generates additional revenue streams that are recurring. So I'm not saying that the non-recurring, or I'm not saying that the building permits should be treated as a recurring revenue stream. I'm just saying that it's not really black and white where it's either recurring or it's non-recurring. I think it's a little bit more of a gray area. And when you say, well, we have this deficit of $1 million because our recurring revenue stream doesn't match our recurring expenses, I don't think it's quite that simple. I think that making it seem like our budget is structurally out of balance by $1 million, I disagree with that. I certainly understand the argument that Jason's making, and I disagree with that argument because, like I said, I think it's more of a gray area. So those are some of the comments I wanted to make. If anyone has any questions on my comments, I would welcome that.
Hey, a couple. Oh, sorry, Wendy, go ahead.
Well, you're probably headed like both of what you're saying makes sense to me. Run it both ways. So let's say we don't treat those as recurring revenue streams, and we do. What's the long term? And like tell the rest of that story. What happens if we play it both ways?
Well, I think Kaylin brings up a really good point, and I agree with her. I think it is a gray area. First of all, in terms of basing things on what we know, she's absolutely right, and that's why I did bring up the 228,000, I believe is what it is. I think that has to be accounted for in this budget. And Julie said earlier, we're already budgeting slightly ahead of where the current guidance is on revenue. So I think those are two adjustments that absolutely, I'm in complete agreement that do need to be made. I feel certain, and I would love to know what this is, Caitlin, because we've had this discussion obviously in budget committee meetings before, what the relationship is between new permits and new recurring revenue. And maybe there's a study somewhere that has laid out some formula that says for every one person you add, you lose this in one-time revenue, but you gain this in recurring revenue. And then you also, have to take into account the recurring expense part of that as well, right? Because every time we add new people, we have to add, protection and in terms of, fire and police and road maintenance and other things. So there's, she's exactly right. It is a gray area, and there's a lot of moving parts. It's probably not a like for like. It's somewhere in between. And if I was smart enough to figure that out, I would be more than happy to share it with all of you. But I don't know exactly what that would be. And Julie obviously has a lot more expertise in this area. Maybe she could add something to this, but I agree with everything she said. In terms of how it plays out, again, I think it goes back to, we don't, I love how Caitlin said it. It's kind of, working with what's known and what's unknown. Two things that got brought up tonight that are unknown. We talked about recurring revenue, recurring expenses, and permit fees and how all that gets affected. I guess the only reason I brought up the other thing that's unknown about impact fees is because I brought it up now because we're dealing with a property tax discussion now. And she's exactly right. We have no idea what's going to happen. I'm making there's no commentary from me either for or against anything. I'm just laying out the possibility of what's to come. If the petition doesn't gather enough signatures and it's not on a referendum, then the impact fee discussion is null and void. But if it does gather enough signatures and it does go on a referendum and it is passed, then impact fees that we have budgeted for this coming fiscal year will be different. in some shape. And I don't, even if I don't, and again, I don't know if the impact fees just continue, there's no gap, even if you lose it and get it back, or if you lose it, or if you don't lose it, I don't know. But I do think there's a potential for some change in our revenue projections. Julie, to the question that Caitlin raised, which is a good one about permit fees and how that can be viewed versus as one time versus recurring. Do you have anything to add to that?
Not really, other than that's how local governments consider the permit fees. That's how they classify them as recurring revenue. I mean, non-recurring as one time. So we're not doing it anything different from other local governments that I know. But you're both right in that, you know, we're hopeful that any local government is hopeful that those permits are going to turn around in the future and bring about increased property tax, sales tax revenue, you know, bring about other sources of revenue. But just as you said, then it also brings about additional expenses. And those are unknown. So you don't, you know, that you kind of include those in your 5-year budget, which we don't have, but we're hoping, you know, in the future that everybody's going to start working on that. And so that's something that you would include in your 5-year plan, where your permit fees have gone down, but then, you know, you're budgeting for more sales tax, property tax, and all of that. And one other thing I want to mention about the grant funds from the state, you can definitely put it in this year and then earmark whatever expenditures you want to use it for, but not to actually fund those expenditures until you know the grant funds have been received, because the local governments have to apply for that, and the state has to approve the application and those use of funds before they will distribute the funds. So at this point, it's not 100% certain, but if you put those revenue funds in there, then just make sure that they're not spent on expenditures until you get the okay from the state.
That would have to be a designated expenditure for those funds, in my opinion. Is that right?
That's correct.
So if I might just add a little bit more, my opinion is that if property taxes are going to be increased from 15 cents to 30 cents, I don't have a strong opinion one way or another as to whether they should or should not be increased. I think, you know, it's hard to make an increase at this time on households who may already be struggling. But at the same time, there's a lot of needs in our town, needs that we cut out of the budget, needs that weren't even part of the budget to begin with, but could have been. So if you're going to increase the property taxes, what I would say is it should be done in order to provide additional services that are not in the budget that we see today. If it's going to be a property tax increase just simply to make it through this year and have a more structurally balanced budget, I would not be in support of that whatsoever. However, if it's being done in order to maybe provide some of the funding back to the police department that we had to cut out, or some of the funding to the fire department that we had to cut out, that's the kind of thing that I would be more in favor of, or if it would be for some of those longer term projects that Jason brought up. But I think what the job is of BOMA is to prioritize what are those things that we need, and then determine, does this property tax increase cover those things? If not, is the property tax increase, maybe it ought to be more, maybe it ought to be less. But I think what your job is to prioritize what those needs are, and then determine the property tax increase that corresponds to those needs. Not let's just raise the property taxes because we don't have a structurally balanced budget this year.
And I can agree with that. I think this point in time, it's certainly hard for, even though it's a small amount, 150 or 200 or $400 is a lot for somebody that's struggling and doesn't know their future. I think it's anytime's a bad time to raise property taxes, but certainly in this cycle, it's certainly a bad time.
As far as the amount, I know the last meeting that we had at the BOMA meeting, the question was posed about how much. And maybe I spoke out of turn by saying, well, anything less than a double, I don't know that I would consider. I was simply putting a number out there as I've thought about property taxes for the past several years and where we might need to move to. And I know Alderman Duggar, I think probably would echo some of this. 30 cents was kind of what was in my mind for a couple of reasons. One, in order to make it meaningful to our budget, but number two, what I didn't want to see the board do is and what I've seen in some other areas is where you come back and you're raising them every 2 to 3 years or 4 years. And we've had a history of trying to set a rate and stay at that rate for a longer period of time. And I think from a budget perspective, not only for the town, but also for the citizens, having something that's more known for a longer period of time would be more beneficial than the unknown of, are we going to raise them again next year or in 2 years or in 3 years? So that's simply why I said, let's, 30. It could be some other number. That's for the board to decide. But I think to Caitlin's point, the board has to prioritize what those expenses are. I agree. I agree completely. I would love to see a capital improvements budget crafted that can be something that we can work towards with some of the revenue that we're discussing. I think that would be a great use of funds. But in the event that we were to run into some difficulties in other areas, you brought up police and fire and other things, I just think the board needs the flexibility to be able to use that revenue as the board sees fit. And that's the only reason I brought up the dedication of cents to certain things, because, the situation can be fluid, and I think the board needs the ability to have some flexibility to use that revenue where it's most appropriate.
It seems like it'd be really, if I'm a citizen, I can live with the flexibility if there's some sort of accountability. If we're just raising property taxes to put aside, we already, we've shown like you can get stuck for a while. And so we want to make sure that we're being safe, but we have to show, I don't think we have to show them cent for cent how we're going to spend the money. But if we are, and I'm not even saying we should, but if we're going to raise property taxes, I do think there has to be some sort of, this is why we're doing it. And this is, we may not need to be specific, but we can't just raise them to I'm agreeing with Caitlin that you just don't raise them just to have that security or to fund our budget deficits.
And one of the things I would say to that too, and I think it's an important point to make for those that are watching or as you're having the discussion with citizens, that at least it was important to me, and I know from speaking with other board members at the time, to be able to say that we had extinguished all revenue options, that we had gone down every avenue that we could go down to try to generate as much revenue as possible for the town, whether it be through, I think, 2 different special census, right? When they had the reassessment of property, the appraisals, we opted to adopt the higher assessment amount. We've increased some of our fees that we charge for development. And I may be missing something if I am Mayor or Tommy or somebody, and maybe other areas. But I feel like as a town that we have gone after and pursued every revenue option that we could pursue before getting to a property tax increase. And I think whether you look at, you can lay out the things that the town is, I know Chief Parker's on here. There's things that we cut. We cut almost $119,000 from his original budget this year. I know there are things that he would love to see done. I know the fire department and Chief Spencer there, I know there are things that they would like to do. We talked about the email from Commissioner Lathers, and there's some really exciting opportunities in partnering with the county to bring additional amenities to the town. I mean, there's definitely, we won't even talk about roads, right? I don't think we've even brought up roads yet. We've got obviously a lot of road projects. Yeah,
I'm here. I was gonna get to roads.
we could attack. Yeah, so there's all sorts of things that money can go towards. It's just to Caitlin's point, the board has to prioritize, what you want to do.
I think one of the things that, the other thing too, as far as raising taxes in the short run, it looks like that, from a conversation standpoint, it feels like we're talking about, oh, well, we're at a budget deficit, but really that has nothing to do with the tax increase. One of the things from a service or from an amenity standpoint, we are spending a lot of that money on road projects right now, and those roads are going to continue to grow, and those expenses are going to continue to be there, and we're going to have to service that area also. So those are huge dollars that are going out this year and last year, et cetera. So I think that one of the things that I would advise and just echo from your guys' assessment, Jason and Caitlin, is that I don't think that I would tie BOMA's hands as to what they're going to spend that money on necessarily, because the situation is fluid. Day-to-day operations are in such a manner that, we may need one department that needs the money this year and a different department that needs it next year. And if it's already earmarked places, I would advise against earmarking it to specific areas, just because it just makes it a difficult way to do business, I guess. And I don't want to see anybody hamstrung in that way from a budget perspective.
So, Bob, talk to me specifically about capital improvement projects and what a fund like that could go towards.
The adequate facilities tax?
No, the capital improvement project. If we had a fund for CIPs, what specifically type of projects could that go towards?
This would be a new fund created. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that's what you're talking about.
Well, a new fund created, you can call it capital improvements or whatever, but I mean, it's a budget fund. It sounds like it would be created by the town. It could be used for pretty much any purpose that BOMA voted on. Even though you call it a capital improvements, I mean, I would assume it'd be for capital infrastructure improvements, but BOMA is still the legislative body that's got to designate how the money's spent. So BOMA could put restrictions on that fund if they wanted to. And just they were only going to use these kind of projects. You'd have to spell that out in your ordinance that you create it with a resolution.
Yeah, I ask because personally, I would not feel comfortable putting money into a fund where the story could be pitched to the town. This is for roads and infrastructure, but then we put it towards a rec center expansion. I think while a rec center expansion and a basketball court and another park and all those things are great, and I want all those things too, I think they're very different. And I think we should be specific about what we want these funds to go towards. And in my opinion, roads is it's a necessity, where those other things are awesome and nice to have, and we definitely want them, but I would put them lower on the list of needs for Nolensville.
Oh, heck, I was thinking about a croquet court there. I think it would be something that's really needed. I'm just kidding.
I think you got one in your front yard, don't you?
Yes, but it can be made better. We want a dome over it. But that's okay. I'm just kidding. I would be serious about one thing. This is the worst time in the world to have a property tax increase. I know we've gone 12 years without one. This is the worst time imaginable for a property tax increase, and we'll all hear from it. If somebody suggested that we take our needed funds from our reserve and skip property tax increase this year, I would support it for 1 year. Just a thought.
Just for clarification, actually, technically, we had a property tax increase in 2014, 15, or 16 on the reassessment.
Jason mentioned that.
We went back from 8 cents back to 15 cents, so we almost doubled it back in 2000.
I thought it was 3 cents, Tommy.
I think it was around 8. It went down to our readjustment went from 8 cents, and we kept it at 15. And Julie, I don't think you were here then, but
I wasn't, no. But that brings up a point that there is another reassessment happening in 21. So that's right around the corner.
Yeah. All bad.
I was the one that did that adjustment. I mean, I made the motion to put the 15 cents on the property tax. The only reason I did it is because of what we're talking about tonight. The areas that we need to cover, that was roads, and police, fire, stuff of that nature. And it turned out that later on, I found out that I made the motion so people could get a raise, which was not the case. But I'm in favor with you, Mayor, and Jason, and Tommy, the rest of you. If we're going to do it this year, I mean, don't raise the property tax. Use a little bit of the reserve and make up the difference and see how it's played. If it didn't, what it's doing to the economy. Out for a year and see how it works. But I made the motion simply on the fact that we were running into a shortfall. And I've been hearing this for so long, I made the motion for that tax raise to try to help us out of it, not knowing the virus was going to knock a hole in it even deeper than what it is right now.
In the last budget meeting, when Jason and you were presenting, we really weren't ready. Like, the idea of raising property taxes was kind of dropped in that conversation. So this is kind of catching us up. I don't think any of us were saying that night that we should do it as much as what would happen if, because your direction that night was, if you're going to do it, just be aware that it needs to coincide with this budget cycle. My question to each of you on the budget committee would be, what a difference a couple of weeks makes. If you were reconvening the budget and looking again, is there anything different right now? Any changes you would want to make off the top of your head right now that you would do if you were meeting again tonight?
I'll let the other members go first.
I'm not sure if we cut enough revenue or not. I mean, it's still an unknown for the first and second quarter of 2021.
So one thing I would like to point out is that when we look at our revenues for next year compared to where we expected to end the year this year, we're looking at a 20% decrease in revenues. When you look at next year's budget compared to this year's budget, I think it was more like a 7% decrease. Mm-hmm. But we're already looking at approximately 20% decrease compared to where we expected to end this year. So I think we have cut out quite a bit, and that 20% number's right in the middle of the range that Jason gave when he first started talking tonight about the expectations for GDP over the next, I don't know if it was over the next 12 months or over the next few quarters. So I'm comfortable with where it's at. I don't think we know enough right now. Nobody knows what's going to happen. So with that said, I would love if the budget committee could continue to meet quarterly and assess this quarterly. And if we need to cut them down further in 3 months or 6 months, then we can do that. If we have room to raise them, then we can do that. But I just don't think we know enough tonight. But I would like to make the request to meet quarterly if everybody else agrees with that.
I agree with that.
I think we agree. I mean, we come to that agreement in one of our meetings. I don't remember
we
which
did.
one it was, but
Right.
Jason or
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I think that we said this last meeting a couple times too, was that at the end of the day, all these forecasts, they're a lot of experts, but they're shooting from the hip. I mean, they're doing good projections based on numbers that they have no idea about, and I don't think we're going to know about them for a while either. And so, one of the things that we did say during the last budget meeting is that, if we do have a spike in revenue, or the opposite, if we do have revenue cut down, that we can always call a special budget meeting and a special adjustment to the budget itself. And I think that was kind of the mentality going in, just because we don't have enough information yet, and it seems the most prudent path.
Oh, I agree. I certainly hope in September, October, November, December, we increase everybody's budget and give back some stuff we cut out. I mean, that would be the ultimate end.
A couple of things to add. It's funny, all this makes me think of Harry Truman saying he wished he had a one-handed economist. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that statement. Because all these projections and these forecasts and budgeting, it's on one hand this, but on the other hand this. He's like, can somebody just find me a one-handed economist? I would love to give the board some more definitive information, but I think to Caitlin's point and Jeff's point, we just simply don't know right now. This is by far the most difficult budget process I think we've ever been through as a town. It is interesting to point out, and I think I may have said this at the last meeting, we are, even in the midst of what we're going through, one of the worst recessions that we've ever experienced, as a town, we'll be spending nearly $9 million on infrastructure improvements in the coming fiscal year. At least that's what the recommendation was from the budget committee, and that's what the board will take up. To Derek's point, maybe it's overdue, and we've been preparing for this, but at least we're in a position now where we can begin to work on some of these projects. As far as the property tax increase, I'm not an elected official anymore, so I don't have to worry about this. But I have said now for probably 3 or 4 years in a row that we have got to look at our property tax rate at some point. And it feels like every year there is some rationale as to why we should put it off into the future. Whether it's new development or commercial or improvement in sales tax numbers or whatever the case may be. But I would just say that if the board decides not to look at the property tax rate this year, I strongly feel that that's something that you'll have to look at in the next budget cycle. We can't continue on the path that we're on with what Chief Parker needs from a police standpoint, all of the discussions around the fire department. I mean, I'm looking at the information that we got in the workshop on roads, and I realize we're addressing a number of those issues, but it just the top priorities were $31 million. I mean, we can kick this can down the road a while, and I realize the timing of this is terrible, which is unfortunate, but from what I've seen on social media, what little time I spend on it, and from conversations I've had with citizens around Nolensville, they're saying, hey, increase property taxes. Hey, we would love to see some things get improved. We'd love to see something get spent on some different areas. We realize that we've been very fortunate for a long time at the rate that we're at compared to other municipalities in Williamson County. I guess we might get some pushback right now, or the board might get some pushback right now because of the timing. But I'm not convinced that the town hasn't already come to the realization they already understand it's probably time for something like this in order to address a lot of the needs that we've discussed tonight. But I realize that's been a little bit of an unpopular position to take for some time now. So that's my 2 cents on property taxes.
Yeah, when we get to second reading, but I know in the public reading, I expect a lot of feedback, and that'll be an interesting BOMA meeting, figuring out how to allow public feedback. But we'll figure it out. Anyway, I personally, if we do 15-cent increase with like 5 cents dedicated to the fire department, and then 10 cents for capital improvement projects, but I would want to also discuss what exactly that means. And if there's a way to make 2 cents of that flexible, where it could also go to recovering public works and police department and engineering and planning and the things that they cut in the event that things recover. I'd like for that to happen as well. I don't know if we could word it in a way where 2 cents is flexible, but that's my position. I'm happy to commit to, and I hope that type of split of that 15 cents is discussed and we get feedback on it from public comment.
I don't support tying up our money. I like to keep it totally up to us as we need it. I certainly don't support tying it up or dedicating it to anything.
Derek, can I suggest that, like, as a citizen, it would be a lot easier to have a discussion about the budget at the public workshop coming up if you all could decide tonight one way or another. Are you going to increase taxes or are you not going to increase taxes? If you are going to increase taxes, decide tonight what you're going to do with it, rather than saying, we'll decide at the next BOMA meeting.
We amended, I didn't mean to interrupt, Caitlin. I'm sorry. We amended the budget to be 30 cents just for the intent of it being on if we don't amend it again, that's what will pass at second reading.
Yeah, so I understand that it's at 30 cents right now, but tonight it sounds like maybe not everybody agrees anymore that it should be 30 cents. So, like, I don't think the mayor is in favor of increasing it to 30 cents at this point. You can jump in if I've misstated what your opinion is. And I think a few of the other aldermen were not necessarily convinced 30 cents is the right way to go. So, like, as I'm listening to you all, I'm not here to say do it or don't do it, because I definitely see the both sides of the argument. But as a citizen, if you're going to make a change or not make a change, do it now instead of doing it at the second reading, unless things change. I mean, instead of talking now about, well, we may or may not, like, can you just decide something tonight, or at least give a little bit more guidance to.
Isn't it hard to ask them to vote on something tonight like that? I mean, they're not going to vote, essentially, and they'd be making a decision before there's even public comments on something. That's difficult to do for them. So I don't think it's fair for us as a committee to ask them to do that.
Right, but if that, I mean, you're absolutely right that right now the budget stands at 30 cents. To me, as a resident, it's unclear who on the board is in favor of 30 cents, who on the board is in favor of 15 cents, and if it's at 30 cents, what are we going to do with that? And if we could just have more of a conclusion to the conversation instead of just asking a bunch of questions. Right now, we're in the asking a bunch of questions and still not making any decisions on it.
Caitlin, if we're going to raise property taxes this year, I think 30 cents is the appropriate amount. And if we decide to raise it, I certainly would support 15-cent tax increase. But I just threw out that this is the worst possible. I've heard from people already that I've heard from a lot of people already that say we're hurting. We just cannot afford something else on top of us. That's why I suggested, it's just a suggestion. If we vote to raise property taxes, I think 30 cents is all right. I'll support it and live with the phone calls. But if we want to put it off to next year, I would be supportive of taking the money out of the reserve to allow us to do that. And I've heard nobody else say that, so it's just an idea.
To Caitlin, to your point, I understand what you're saying. The reason why I pushed to have this work session or to talk with you all is to get what you're giving tonight, is to get this information. But I would like a chance for the public comments before I would like a chance to hear from people, and I wanted this information and then some time to let people hear it, think about it, talk about it, and then to have my opinion's not ready right now. And so,
if that's the case, then as a resident, I would like to hear, what are you going to do with that extra 15%? We've thrown out a bunch of ideas, but just knowing what the board wants to do with that 15 cents would make a huge difference. And that's where I was saying earlier, it's up to you as a board to prioritize what the town needs are, and then discuss those needs and how to fund them accordingly. But to just have a 15-cent increase without any discussion on where that's going or how we're going to revise the budget, it makes it really difficult to go into the public comments and even knowing how that money's where it's going to go. So what I'm getting at is, it would, what I would love is either, if the board, I know you can't vote on anything, but if the board says, you know what, the tax increase now is not the right time, or yes, it is the right time, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to give the police department their $150,000 back, or however much that we cut. And we're going to give the fire department their $150,000 back, or however much. I don't remember exactly what the numbers were. Rather than just, we're going to increase it and it's going to go to the general fund and we'll do whatever we want with it whenever we want, or as the year progresses. You know what I mean? It's up to you. You guys can decide what to do. But as a resident, I think this is a great time to figure out what to do with it instead of saying we'll figure it out later.
This is Julie. I'd like to step in just from a financials perspective. I agree with Caitlin on there. If you're going to raise a property tax, you do need to know what you're spending it on. And from a financial perspective, you have to consider your decisions and their impact on future operations. So say if you do give, and I'm just saying these departments because Caitlin mentioned it, 150 back to the police department, and whatever dollar amount to the fire department, you really have to determine if that is sustainable in the next several years. And so, Nolensville hasn't done it, and I strongly encourage and suggest that you create a 5-year budget. It's operating and capital as well. And so therefore, you can determine if that amount is sustainable. I wouldn't just throw some more money out no matter where it's going to go, because it's obvious there's a desire and there's a need for funding the volunteer fire department and maybe more money to the police department. But can the town sustain that? And the best way to determine that is to do like a 5-year plan. And so I strongly suggest that maybe the board direct the finance department to work with the police department and volunteer fire department and see if that's sustainable, or come up with a budget that is sustainable. I have never been directed to that, and I think that's a great idea, and that's the only way that you can be sure that it's sustainable. I mean, just throwing money at something now isn't a smart thing to do without knowing how it's going to affect future and if we can sustain it. So hopefully that makes sense. And then also, I just wanted to address when Derek had mentioned the capital improvements project fund. A lot of local governments do that, and so similar to what Bob said, you know, the board will determine what can be spent from that. It's not really a legal perspective, like the state of Tennessee doesn't dictate it like it does for the adequate facilities tax or impact, but you can transfer funds from any of our other funds into that capital improvement project fund to use for those specific needs. So the general fund can make transfers in there, so could the impact fund or the adequate facilities fund, any fund can transfer in there, and then you would you know, determine what can those funds can be used for. So that's something that can definitely be set up at any time, actually.
Okay, thank you.
A couple of things to add. I would point out, just to be fair, if property taxes were due right now, I think this is an entirely different conversation, but we're talking about changing property tax rate for something that's going to be due in 2021. I'm certainly hopeful that our situation as a town changes and our situations as individuals change by that point, but I can understand if that was something due, you know, next month, but this is something that we're planning for next year. Secondly, in terms of fund balance on some of our funds, just to kind of give an idea, State Street Aid, as of June 30th, 19, our projected fund balance is going to be $740,000, whereas this budget would take the projected fund balance in June of 21 down to 425. So it would be reducing that fund balance by over $300,000. In the impact fee fund, our projected fund balance at the end of this fiscal year is 3.9 million. We would take that fund balance down to 61,000. So we will have essentially spent that entire fund balance. And then on facilities tax, we estimate the fund balance to be at the end of this fiscal year 4.4 million. And this budget would take that projected fund balance down to 1.1 million. So we are, as far as the general fund goes, I think, Julie, what's that number? 8. I've got in my mind 8 and change. Hold on.
Yeah, it's 8.4, almost 8.5 at the end of this year. This is what Brentwood's doing too, pre-virus numbers. Since
Right.
You don't know, this is projected based on if everything continued at the same path. So that's kind of what they're all saying with their disclaimer. So we're hopeful it would still be that, but yeah.
So 8.4, and we're projecting that fund balance to go to next year 8.2. So I guess as we're talking about discussion around revenue and budgets, we'll be spending a substantial amount of money out of our overall fund balance, mostly for roads this year. In fact, almost entirely for roads, except for just our normal recurring expenses for our departments. But as you think about revenue going forward, it took some time to accumulate that balance, and it will take some time to replenish it.
Absolutely.
Just to expand to Jason upon you talking about this isn't due next month, it'll be due in 2021. The overall property tax is over like 2,000 to 2,500, but the Nolensville portion of that is much smaller.
Much smaller.
Yeah, it's what, 100 to 200 depending on the size of your house. So 15 cents to 30 cents is going to take your number, which is 150, and make it 300. And the
Right.
overall property tax that you're paying of 2,200 or 2,500, it's a small portion.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right.
You're muted, Tommy.
Tommy,
And we don't know what the county's gonna do on their property tax, do we? I mean, the county could raise their property tax as well. But back to Caitlin's point, I've said for 10 years, we need a property tax increase because we've got roads in a couple of subdivisions that are 30 years old. And we can spend the property tax money on roads every year and never get caught up.
Yep.
Okay, so Larry, you commented on the 15-cent increase, right?
Wake up, Larry. Larry.
I don't know if you heard me. There he is.
hey, Larry.
Go ahead.
Okay, say something.
I just wanted to know if you commented on the 15-cent increase.
Yeah. Well, I'm like Tommy. We've heard this for years. And I've brought it up 2 or 3 times. I know Tommy's brought it up a bunch of times. And it's always been pushed under the table. That's the reason I brought it up this time. And I agree to be the one to sponsor. I totally agree. I mean, but when we was talking to 15 cents, I had it pegged as what we were talking about was roads, fire, and police. To take the pressure off our budget. I mean, and then I hear the Jason, capital improvement, we got to have a little bit in that. Whatever it is that we have a little bit of money to put in.
I think that, yes, I think the point I was trying to make is I think, and what Commissioner Lathers was saying in her email today is that at least right now there's verbal confirmation that the county is willing to partner with Nolensville to add additional amenities into the town in terms of expanded library or expanded parks and park and recreation facilities. It was added the playground there at the rec center, which is a really nice area. So I just, in terms of, and to Derek's point, roads are obviously really, really, really important, and it should be a high priority. But I'm sure as a board, and I heard it in the past when I served in a board position as well, is that citizens move here for a lot of reasons, but they have certain expectations in terms of the amenities and services that they want to see offered here. And if we have the opportunity to budget for and plan for future expansion and addition of amenities, I think that's something that would be an exciting opportunity. Just like with the rec center, we kicked in half of the cost to build it, but we don't maintain it, we don't staff it, we don't equip it, and the rec center has turned out to be a really, really important part of our community. And if we budget appropriately now, to Julie's point, and lay out a 5-year budget, I think there's opportunities to work with Commissioner Lathers and the county to do some other exciting projects, in addition to looking at future road improvements, in addition to making decisions on how we want to provide fire protection services in the future.
I always feel like the process that I get kind of stuck in the process, because we all kind of are on the same page about increasing the property tax, but then this time period is a bad time period. So there's, you go back and forth with that. We all have the idea that we kind of need, maybe not a specific to the cent plan, but we need to be able to respond with some accountability of what we are raising property taxes for. But what I'm hearing, and it makes so much sense to me, is we also need a 5-year kind of plan for that. And I would rather have the 5-year plan before I decide to raise property taxes. But I'm stuck in this process where, because of the budget cycles, we need to make a decision quickly. So that just leaves me going, wait, this order's out of whack here. I want the 5-year budget cycle kind of laid out so I know what we're doing with police and fire, so I can make a decision does that make sense? Like, this process is getting me stuck, kind of making bad decisions because we're taking things out of order.
Understood. That's why you're the board and we're not. So, I mean,
thanks, Jason Patrick.
Sorry, Wendy Ritchie. No, I completely agree.
Is there some way I can fix that though? How quickly can a 5-year, is it unreasonable to think a 5-year plan can be put together before I have to make a decision about a tax increase?
Yes.
I thought so.
It is short.
It's not a quick process.
I guessed.
I worked on capital improvement budget project in Nashville, and it's a long process. Of course, Nashville's a little bit bigger, but it'll take us a little while.
But are we smart then to make decisions about the needs of EMS and investing in county amenities and doing all that without that 5-year plan in place?
No, I agree that we need that. I agree that we need it, and it would help to explain to the citizens what we intend to do. And perhaps we can get that plan started once we get a new town administrator and he can start working on it.
Wendy, to me, I'm thinking about the 5-year plan. If I had a 5-year plan for a fire department and a 5-year plan for the police department and a 5-year plan for public works, and we're seeing those numbers do this, and we're seeing our sales tax revenue kind of do this, and we're seeing, permits up here kind of flat, maybe going down, that's the last projection is permits are going down, but kind of doing this, that there's going to be a number that will balance all that. If you just talk about property tax, it's probably going to be like $1.50. It's going to be a massive, massive, massive number because services are in high demand, amenities are in high demand, but nobody wants to raise property taxes. Nobody wants to pay more money for those things. So we have to prioritize the best we can. And I think 30 cents after not raising it for 12 years or however many years it's been, without an actual raise, not counting the reassessments, I think we're well under what we would realize that number should be if you were trying to balance everything. And but I think we still need to be vocal about what we plan to do with that increase, so we're responsible to the town and we're visible.
Vocal about what we want to do, or committed on paper to what we're doing?
Well, right now, vocal, because we can't vote on a thing now. This isn't a voting issue tonight, but I feel like I've been very vocal. If we go 15 cents, I want to do 5 to the fire department, and I want to do the rest for capital improvements, and maybe 2 cents to pay back police and public works and engineering and planning the cuts that they had to make.
See, I want to be vocal in that if I do that, before I say 5 cents to the fire department, they may need more than 5 cents. That's why I would like the 5-year budget before I do that, because they're preparing some different options for us on paper. So we could look at some different plans that they have, which would all be different figures, which would really shape whether it's 5 cents or 7 cents or what we do. So that's where I'm like, without the 5-year plan, I don't want to designate a portion in any specific direction.
I agree with you about not designating it, Wendy. When we do a 5-year plan, it has to be realistic. It can't be a wish list. It's got to be based on what we think our best guess is, the funds we would have to fund it.
Well, and I think this budget committee, it can do that. I think the budget they just brought us is great. So that's why
I agree.
I'm glad you're working on it and that they're committed to staying with it, you know, with the process and meeting quarterly.
Wendy, too, I'm sorry if I was being sarcastic earlier. I wasn't meaning to be. To answer your question earlier, in terms of having a 5-year budget on paper before you make a property tax decision or not, my only concern, first of all, I think to Derek's point, I think he's right. I mean, there are no lack of areas of opportunity for the town to allocate resources. We've already mentioned a bunch tonight, like I said, roads, fire, police, amenities. I mean, we could go on and on and on. Even if we were to do a 5-year budget, which I think we should, there's not a number. Well, there is a number. It would be so heinous, nobody would consider it, but there's not really a number from a property tax perspective that would satisfy all of the needs that we could put on paper in terms of a wish list. To the mayor's point, wish list versus something realistic. My concern on property taxes has been for the past few years is that we continue to, once we wait another year, that's another year of net revenue that is, it's not recoverable. We won't make it back up. Last year during the budget process with our prior town administrator, the argument was made, we need to raise property taxes now. The discussion was, well, you need to know what you're going to spend it on before you raise them. And here we are a year later, and I completely understand and agree with what you're saying. I guess from my perspective, I would be comfortable saying there are a number of things that this can be used for that are all going to be beneficial to the town. Do we have it all figured out to the penny on paper yet? No, but if we don't do this now, then that's yet another year. And you've heard Tommy and Larry and others say, we've been talking about this year after year after year after year, and there's always a good reason to not do it this time. Let's talk about it next time. And then the next time, there'll be another good reason to not do it that time. And let's talk about the next time. And as we keep doing that, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue that could fund some of these things that are so important to each of you and to the citizens as a whole that the board continues to hear about. So if we're going to go ahead and do a 5-year budget and base that decision on a 5-year budget, then let's commit to getting that 5-year budget done and a capital improvements project budget done and have that ready for the next budget cycle. I'm not trying to be argumentative with you.
Yeah, that makes sense what you're saying.
But
so could we not have for lack of a better term, a discretionary line item where that 15-cent increase would have to be voted on to be spent by the board? It'd have to be.
Well, we do that anyway.
Well, but I'm just saying, Wendy's wanting to know where it's going. Caitlin's mentioned she's wanting to know where it's going. I'm just saying, if we dedicate it to some kind of line item, that it would have to come back before the board to say, we've got a road that needs emergency repair or a road that needs $150,000 to be repaid.
I don't think, we do that. I think more my understanding is before I say 5 cents is going here and 10 cents is going here, that we really kind of have an understanding of, if we're going to raise it 15 cents, at the end of it, what are we giving the citizens for their 15 cents? Not to the penny necessarily, But in general, is it even if it's just kind of a general statement from us, is this is what we're doing here. We're trying to get your roads and your EMS and
Julie's the financial person, but I could see where you could have a line item budget for capital improvement discretionary fund or something like that, and put all the tax money in there, but then it would take further BOMA action to decide how to spend it.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to, because I'm not in favor of dedicating 5 cents or 4 cents or whatever the number is. That's just Tommy Duggar's opinion.
Julie, as far as setting up like what was brought up earlier, setting up a separate fund that's just a capital improvements fund that the additional property tax dollars would go into. That's, like you said, that's really just a budgeting item. It's not. It doesn't have the legal constraints that other funds do, and money could transfer from the general fund into the capital improvements fund. But at least from I guess from the perspective of the board, if they're trying to communicate this message to the town, we could identify from a budget perspective, these are the types of expenditures that you would expect to come from a capital improvements fund, such as additional equipment or additional road repairs or additional facilities or additional recreation facilities. It's not for pencils and water and whatever else. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that is.
Hey, Tommy.
Yes, sir.
You said you're not in favor of allocating, you said 4 or 5 cents. Was that just in general? You don't want any of the cents of the 15 allocated? Or did you mean specifically?
Well, I'm just saying, if we allocate it to the fire department, that's got to be something that's sustainable, because if we do that, then they're going to start a full-time fire department. I'm not saying we don't need that, but I'm saying we haven't seen a plan from them, or I haven't. So, the worst thing we want is to start a full-time fire department and then revenues not come back, and we can't continue to give them $700,000 a year or $600,000 or $5, whatever the number is. I'm just saying, whatever it is, it's got to be sustainable.
I feel like we have seen plans from them that range from 2 24-hour full-time, and there were just regular firefighters, and then captains, and every different level in between, with a range of like 200 to like 600,000 additional funds that could fund that. I thought we had all seen that, and if you haven't, I'll get it to you, and I'm sure Chief Spencer would get it to you. But I feel like Chief Spencer or Tom Seyfried should be here if we're talking budget, with them being so involved.
May I ask a question as a budget committee member, not as a citizen? Just may I ask a question? Has the board or the town made any decisions, or has there been a committee formed that's exploring this, that we are definitively going to go in the direction of remaining volunteer or being combination or being full-time, or the town wants to start their own department, continue to partner with the volunteer fire department or with Williamson County on EMS? I guess kind of to Wendy's point, knowing what the longer range plan is in terms of providing those services, fire and EMS, it would be very helpful to the budget committee so that we can make proper recommendations in terms of dollars allocated to fire protection. Because right now it does feel like it's a little bit, it can be a little bit ambiguous at times in terms of what's the longer range plan for the town with fire protection.
Let me help you on that a little bit, because I sit in on their meetings, and I've been a big supporter of the fire department for a long time. The one thing that bothered me was when we sit down and talk, they were talking safer grants. I think you know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And if they applied for those safer grants, they got them. Well, those grants are only good the first year with 100%. The year maybe 70 if the town's out 30. I'm not sure how many, 2 or 3 years, but anyway, at the end of that, the town's responsible for every bit of whatever the grant didn't pay. But you're talking 2 or 3 years you could be looking at 0 the first year. 30%, you could be looking at 100% salary or whatever the benefits are that you had to pay through that grant. The town could be handling the next, at the end of 3 years. That's something I looked at. Yeah, that was the only thing that was bothering me about with the fire department and what and she brought up. And I'd even said something to Tom, we could wind up like Mount Juliet. They went through that same thing, and at the end of 3 years, Mount Juliet said, sorry, they had to lay those people off, and it kind of put a bad name on them for a while in that county. I just don't want to see noise into that. If we're going to do something, we're going to have to be able to plan for it as we go.
I guess the reason I bring that up, and I'd love for Jeff or Caitlin to chime in on this as well, just again, from sitting in the room going through the budgeting process, is it's one thing to look at additional revenue for a capital improvements budget to where we're looking at more one-time type expenses, repairing Sunset, repairing Clovercroft, buying a piece of fire equipment. That's different than funding firefighters, or like I said in the last meeting, at some point we're going to have to look probably at a separate police facility or expansion of the library or part. Those are all one-time expenses that we can budget for, plan for, work towards, and be able to meet that obligation. When you're talking about additional police officers or additional firefighters, and especially fire protection, that's the one I think that gets the most discussion. Is it's difficult without knowing what the longer range plan is from a fire protection standpoint. It's difficult to budget for it, whether or not if we're going to maintain kind of the path that we're on, or if we're going to go more combination, which I think is a lot of the discussion, or at some point the town says, you know what, we're just going to get into the fire department business and start handling fire protection services, which we know is a very expensive proposition. And then how does that dovetail in with the county and Bill Jorgensen and EMS, and how does that affect the numbers? It would be, that's something that has, I think to Tommy's point, kind of ongoing recurring expense ramifications that need to be looked at differently than capital improvements projects like what's being recommended this year with phase 3 of Sunset Road and some of the other road improvements, where once that's done, that project is complete, we move on to the next project. I don't know if I'm making sense. And Jeff and Caitlin, if you want to chime in on that, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
My only thought on that is, I think that you're right, and the recurring expense is kind of scary to me looking at the budget, because we only have a few ways that we can continue to pay for that. One way, obviously, is bringing commercial to town, and then the second way is raising taxes. And those expenses don't go away. And so we have to continue to grow in those manners, because at some point we're going to run out of units to build in our area. And we're not going to be able to continue that at some point down the road. And so we're not going to be able to rely on that. We're going to have to rely on the growth of commercial and be supported from sales taxes that way. Or we're going to have to straight up pay for it from a tax standpoint. And those are some pretty steep bills that continue on into the future. So I just think it needs to be looked at from a holistic standpoint, and what all the factors are if we're going to budget for it. And I don't know that I've seen, because we've talked about this in past budget years too. There's so many moving parts that it's difficult to even understand which direction that we need to go in that in the short run. I know what direction we'll end up in the long run if we get commercial revenue and have that need, but it's just more difficult to assess, especially from a forecasting standpoint.
Agreed.
If I'll comment on the fire department, and Tom Seifert and I, we had a 45-minute conversation here, I don't know, couple of 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we ended it. We were going to meet with Bill Jorgensen and his crew, but things have changed with the COVID-19 and all that kind of stuff. But my thought on the fire department is, when we start hiring a paid fire department, it needs to fall up under under the town, just like the police department, backed up by about the volunteers. I mean, I just don't think I just think the town, if we're going to start a full-time fire department or a combination fire department, they need to be town employees, and the fire chief needs to work for the town. The employees need to work for the town, and the volunteers need to volunteer just as Mount Juliet does. And I think in the workshop we had on the fire department, I think Adam said if we went that route, they would sign all the equipment over to the town. We just have to work it out with the county on how all that works.
Yeah, I'm listening to what they're telling us now is their need, and their need is full-time bodies. They need people to that can drive, the ladder truck and the pumper. They need people that can drive that 24/7. That's their need, and that's what they're trying to get to. If we also have a goal of establishing our own combination department that's separate from them, that's great. Luckily, those two things can happen both at the same time and merge together at the end when we do have the funds saved up in this capital improvement project fund, and we're ready to buy land and get some of the equipment and change everything over to full time, or however we do it in the future. We can do that. They're willing to do that. What we would be doing now is starting that process, but also solving the immediate needs, which is we need full-time bodies making full-time salaries that can man the station full time.
So why can't that process happen now? I mean, if you want to give a nickel to the fire department and fund of full-time bodies, why can't that happen underneath the umbrella of Nolensville?
Bob, I don't know why it couldn't. What facility are they going to work out of?
If I'm not mistaken, the county don't have a problem with them staying where they're at.
Okay,
I believe Bill made that comment in the meeting. I may be the only one heard it, or I may be hearing things.
Right. So as long as they can work in tandem, side by side with the volunteer infrastructure and organization that's going now, I don't see why they couldn't. I mean, to me, that's just on paper. Are we paying for it ourselves and dealing with the liability and the insurance, or are they doing it? Regardless, at the end of this is we will have a combination department once we're ready to buy and build the station.
So as Derek is suggesting, he would like to give 5 cents to the fire department, and I think that works out to, I don't know, $200,000 to $250,000. Is that right?
Right. That would be on top of what is already budgeted. Yeah.
So within the budget, couldn't we just say that goes towards fire and not necessarily say that goes to Nolensville Volunteer Fire Department versus newly created Nolensville, like Town of Nolensville Fire Department, but just have that $200,000 to $250,000 in our budget in fire, and the details don't have to be worked out, but at least we would know of the 15-cent property tax increase, fire department's getting an extra $250,000, and it'll be used to add more bodies and keep us better protected. So my question is, do we have to necessarily designate it to one or the other? Couldn't it just be under the bigger fire umbrella?
Again, that goes back to what Tommy was saying, that are we doing something that's sustainable? And I don't believe it is.
Well, if we're funding it in this budget year should be our absolute worst. We shouldn't have another year like this, at least not anytime soon. I mean, people keep using the word unprecedented. So if we can manage to fit it into our budget during an unprecedented budget year, I don't have any concerns about if it's sustainable.
we kind of go back to this thing though, where we go back and forth between deciding if we need the details or we don't. And here's my thing. Where's 5 cents come from? Like, why 5 cents? Why not 6 cents? If we're designating, like we're talking about 15 cents, I have to go to the citizens and say, we chose 5 cents. Why? I have no idea. It just sounded like a good percentage. So that's kind of what I was hoping from the budget committee.
Yeah, and I think the reason, and Derek, you can jump in if I'm wrong, but at the last meeting with the board, Adam had said that they need 500,000 in order to get whatever it was, 3 full-time paid firefighters. And right now they're at 300,000, about 300,000. And so if we gave them 5 cents, that would get them at the level that Adam had said, this is how much we need in order to provide you with this.
I definitely knew that tonight I would, if we're being asked to commit to that 5 cents, I definitely couldn't do that, especially without a conversation with Adam and Tom to kind of talk through the long range of what that looks like. Go ahead, Tommy.
If we can get Tom on here, do we want to add Tom to the conversation?
Here's the thing though, is that this is another one of those conversations that I now don't know whether we're having a conversation about what to do with the budget or with the fire department. Those are two big, long discussions, and they should be meshed together tonight.
So here's where I'm getting frustrated is that as a budget committee member, at our first budget committee meeting, we had all of the department heads at the meeting except for fire, because there was going to be a discussion with the board and with fire, and they're going to determine how we want to go forward. And then at the next budget meeting, again, we fire there because that was something that the board needed to work out with fire. And so now here we are again saying, well, we know what the plan is for fire, so we can't give them money. And on the budget committee, it's frustrating for me to hear that we're dealing with fire. This isn't a new issue that just popped up overnight. This is an issue that we've known about for such a long time. And to be at this point in the game and still not know what we're going to do about fire, like, no, we might not have the answers, but the right answer is not do nothing.
No, nobody said that the right answer is to do nothing. That's for sure. That's what we're.
But Caitlin, if I'm not mistaken, we did have Tom on the call when we had telephonically, we had a call, I believe, the one right before we voted in April. Our last budget meeting that was telephonically, we had Tom on the phone for like an hour, if I'm not mistaken, or 45 minutes. So they were involved.
We did have Adam and Tom on the phone, but that was I think that was our third meeting, and that was after the coronavirus concerns came up, and so that the tone of that meeting was, how do we cut as much as we can possibly cut? And I didn't feel like we got a very good chance to hear from them. These things that we're asking now is, how much do we need in order to do this? How much do we need in order to do that? Because that wasn't the conversation. The conversation was, how much can we cut? And so that's a completely different conversation than the conversation that I would have liked to have with them.
And I understand that, but we couldn't help it the way things changed, and our unprecedented COVID-19. But to say that we didn't bring them to the conversation, I think was inaccurate. And I just want to clarify that they were there.
In the initial meetings, we didn't talk about fire in the first 2 meetings because fire still had to talk with the board of mayor and aldermen. And I wasn't at that meeting, and that meeting wasn't live streamed. And so I don't know what was discussed during that meeting.
That's
but
true.
One thing,
that
Adam
didn't, even though we were hoping that we would have some sort of direction after that meeting, it doesn't seem like there's any direction.
Yeah. One thing is, I talked to Adam and Tom a week and a half ago, again, asking for, I know what you're saying, Derek, but they were putting together kind of in light of the changes that we've had, what budgets could look like. So for now, just in terms of this being a BOMA workshop and getting some input, I want to have more of a discussion with them. And so, but we need to go ahead and move on and think about the budget and what we're going to do on the overall, whether we're going to do an increase or not do an increase. We need to kind of go back to that discussion, because I want to have more of a conversation, and it may be extending that, but Tom and Adam had talked to me about a presentation with information they wanted to get to me. So they're not here, and there's not enough time in this meeting to do all of this tonight. So in terms of the budget, what do we want to do as far as deciding on whether we for sure want a 15-cent increase, and if we want it designated in any way? Those are the two main questions that seem to be on the table, if I'm correct.
Hey, Wendy,
Yes.
do you want to go back and talk with Chief Parker about us cutting his salary, his budget also, or to Kyle about cutting their budget?
I want first, the budget that was presented to us was based on, to my understanding, was based on discussions with them in light of the idea that we had to make some cuts. So what was presented to us as from the budget committee was a budget that took in light conversation with them. Is that correct, Jason?
Yeah, we spoke with every department. We went through line item by line item.
Okay.
We spent time with Tom and Adam on the phone, talking through that situation, as well as Chief Parker. I think the budget we presented takes into account feedback from all parties involved, trying to get to a number that we could all live with.
And I want to be very careful that this is not, I have no intention, I want to fund the fire department. I want to help with money for them. I want to have those discussions, and I don't want them to take forever. So this is not putting that off. It just is sometimes we get so many conversations going at one time, we don't get a decision made, or we make poor decisions. So this tonight is about trying to decide what we're doing with the budget.
But, and I think from a budget perspective, and I think, Caitlin's kind of alluding to this, and Tommy, I think we all know the answer to this, and that is, it's much easier for us to have a budget conversation around police. It's much easier for us to have a budget conversation around public works or administration, because those are all under the purview of the town. We know what the plan is. We know what personnel looks like. We know what the expenses look like. Like, we can work with that as a budget committee and say, here's what we see as being sustainable, and this would be our recommendation. With fire, it's a little bit different, because in my recollection from that night that we had the discussion with Tom and with Chief Spencer, was he had a spreadsheet in front of him and said, I can give you anything from 3 people to 13 people. I mean, it was a range from 300,000 up to $1 million plus. And that's wonderful, but I think the board is going to have to make some decisions on how we want to provide fire protection services. And once we have a better understanding of that, then we can look at our budget, at our revenue, our recurring revenue, our one-time revenue, our other expenses, and we can say, yes, we can make this work, or no, this is going to be difficult to sustain. But until then, we're literally just, I think, Caitlin, that night, we were sitting there doing some rough math and trying to figure out what we thought would work. And Caitlin, I think you said, well, based on what we're hearing, let's move forward with a number. But it wasn't, it wasn't based on the same information as what we base other departments on, which doesn't make it more difficult. The other thing I would add too, and I brought this up at the very beginning, I know there's some difference of opinion on this, but I do think it's, and maybe this doesn't need to be addressed now, or at least discussed now. Maybe this is a discussion for some point in the future once this is more known. We talked about the $50,000 reduction in revenue because of the current guidance and the addition of the $228,000 that, hopefully we will be able to get through the grant process. But has anybody, and I think Derek, you kind of mentioned it earlier, has anybody been able to give any type of definitive answer on impact fees? Because it is such a large percentage of our revenue. Do we know where we stand on that? Whichever way this thing goes, in the next fiscal year, we're either going to have it or not have it. Do we have any further information on that? Anyone?
Yeah.
Jumping off a cliff here, and I need to say before we jump off that cliff that In the age of COVID, I have a 9 p.m. online class to teach. So I'm only got an hour more for this meeting. So so far the answers we've got back on the impact fee, and I don't want to take us on the rabbit trail. I've had answers from state and MTAS that have said that we are allowed to collect impact fees under a mayor aldermanic system. If we don't have that system, we lose that. And Bob has weighed in on that as well.
Well, and the only reason I'm not asking for an hour-long discussion, I mean, I was asking for maybe like a 2 or 3 minute response. The only reason I bring that up is since our budget meeting, you know, I've heard additional discussion from the board around the charter, and I have, you know, I'm not offering any opinion on charter, but the budget part of that discussion is what I have an interest in as a budget committee member. And I just know that from and I'm trying to get to it from from an impact fee perspective, we are looking at budgeted revenue this year of $1,159,000 and our total revenue budgeted for this year is 3.7 million. So it would have a significant effect on the budget that we've recommended, depending on what that answer is. And I don't know what the answer is. I didn't get to hear all the workshop. I heard bits and pieces, and I'm just asking if anybody, Bob or anybody else has. So Eric, you know, if this has been researched and we know for sure that we can.
I am still researching it, although I've done quite a bit of research, and I had to go back and look at. I remember when we passed this back in 2007, but it's been so long since that happened, I hadn't reviewed them in a long time. And I went back and got copies of them. And back then, it was a lot more friendly impact fee era. I don't know if people realize it, but the Middle Tennessee Home Builders filed a lawsuit against Williamson County over their school adequate facilities tax. And that just got, I think it's finally resolved by the Court of Appeal. And they upheld the county had the right to do it. But the home builders and developers in particular don't like these things. And they try and find ways to attack them if they can. Our particular one back in 2007, we based it on our mayor alderman charter, and we based it on 2 sections of our charter, which basically said that we could levy impact fees to help road construction, maintenance, et cetera, et cetera. But in our ordinance, it specifically says by the authority of our mayor aldermanic charter in sections 14 and 15, as prescribed by the Tennessee Code Annotated. My concern is if we change charters, there's probably people saying, oh, it won't affect it at all. My problem is, and what I'm looking at to see is whether there's a similar state statute that deals with mayor commission systems. And if this one were to terminate, what would it take to adopt a new one in that new system? One thing I can tell you for sure, if you had to adopt a new one in a different charter system, you'd probably get some flack. There'd probably be and there have been some impact fees in recent years in Tennessee that the courts have not found very friendly. In fact, the home builders in the Williamson County case actually argued that it was violated the Vested Rights Act. And the court didn't buy that in this most recent case. But there's beginning to be a lot of litigation on these, and that's a concern I have. I'm going to look at, I've looked at impasse decisions, opinions, and I'm going to look at Attorney General opinions on that too, to see if I can find something dealing with that, because it's kind of an unknown topic.
I agree though, what Kayla was saying earlier, I understand how significant that revenue is, but it is very difficult to try to make a budget under something that might or might not, like we've got to work in, like we've got to make a budget for our current system. People have to acknowledge that there are, you know, anything can happen with any system, but I just can't get that far ahead of myself for the loss of impact fees.
Yeah, I'm not. I simply brought it up as I was listening to the board discussions and seeing what MTAS was discussing with regard to impact fees. Again, I didn't get to see the whole thing, so I probably saw snippets, and so I don't know everything that was said. I just know that without that, what we've given you is a pretty pointless budget. So if in fact that is, if we know that we'll be able to continue with it, then great, then we move forward and everything's fine. If we think there's the possibility that we would not be able to continue with it, or that we would go through some significant period of time before it would be reinstated, all I'm simply communicating to the board is that it would take a substantial change in the budget that we've recommended in order to even meet salaries.
Right. So,
or actually, you know what? I take that back. It would be a substantial change in terms of the recommended road projects.
Yeah, I think it would only affect our Sunset project, right? Because we're using the impact fee funds for Sunset.
Yeah, I guess I was just looking at the overall numbers, because if we're looking at total revenue of 3.7.
That total revenue of 3.7 does not include the impact fee fund.
Yeah. Hold on one second. Yeah, it would only affect the road projects. I mean, that's what I was trying to say. It would only affect the road projects going forward. So right now we're recommending, I don't know, nearly $9 million in road projects. It would change that recommendation fairly dramatically.
okay, so I'm pushing because of my lack of time, and there's a couple things more that we're supposed to do. So for the BOMA members, what do we want to accomplish in the next 45 minutes? What's our goal here? We've got the recommendations. Anything else from the budget committee that they want to tell us? Okay, then I think what do we want to do before we finish this meeting up?
Well, I want to talk about town administrators.
Me too.
Yeah, I think we haven't made much progress in the discussion. Jason's given us a lot of information, but is anybody willing to change what we have going into a public hearing on the budget? I'm tickled death with what the budget committee did during their time, and I'm satisfied with that, taking it to the public hearing. And then we can go on to a discussion of the town administrator.
Would it be possible for us as a budget committee to present a slightly revised budget? I know it would vary from the budget ordinance that was already voted on, but would it be acceptable if as a budget committee we prepared a revised budget that you all could at least discuss the next time you have a discussion, and it would include things like revising the state sales tax downward per the state guidance. It would include the one-time recurring or non-recurring revenue that we're getting from the state, which was a little over 200,000. It would just kind of clean up some of these items that have come up since the last time we met. And it wouldn't necessarily change the numbers that are in the ordinance, but it would at least give you guys a clean view to have for discussion so that we're all talking about the same numbers.
Caitlin, it would be no problem with the budget committee presenting us with anything, any suggestion or any documents. If you want to do that as a budget committee, I'd be happy to look at it. Now, I think Tommy would too.
Well, I think it would have to be as in the form as of a proposed amendment by the budget committee to the board instead of a revised budget.
I
Because
I
we've
don't-
already got first reading, so it's gonna take an amendment when we get to the second reading.
Yeah.
So I think that would be, instead of revising the whole budget, I think it would need to be in a form of, here is point A, reduce sales tax by 50,000 or whatever.
Yeah.
One time.
Tommy, I think we would take whatever they give us, and if there's any points that we can agree on, then we can amend the budget at second reading. If they give us it's not a revised budget, it's just proposed amendment to a budget. That's the way I'd look at it.
Hey, Bob, from a procedural standpoint, we wouldn't necessarily hand a different budget over. Would we just come back with, say, 2 or 3 line items that we would say we would recommend that you amend the budget as it passed first reading, that this particular line item would read this and this line item would read that? Is that how you would suggest we move forward with it?
I don't see Bob,
Bob?
but I think we can do that, Jason.
I think that's what I was trying to say.
Okay.
Yeah, I think.
Hey, if I can make one clarification, because I do want to try to be accurate as much as possible. And Julie, let's make sure I have this right. So our general fund revenue is roughly 3.7 million, 3,708,000 is what we're projecting. I think if you look at our 3 main funds that we use for other projects, being state street aid, impact, and facilities tax, I think the total revenue comes out to about 2.4 million. Is that right, Julie? I think that's what we're projecting. State street aid, I think, is about 393,000, and impact, I believe, at 1,159,637, and facilities, I believe we've got that at 841. That would be 2,394,000. Am I right, Julie?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So 2,394,000. So if you look at if you look at impact, facilities, and state street aid, that's about let's just call about 2.4 million. Our general fund revenue is running at about 3.7 million. So our total revenue between all of it, you're talking about 6.1. Impact fees at 1,159,000. I think that it ends up representing, of our total revenue, it represents about 19 to 20% in that range. So I do want to make that correction. I apologize. Any questions on that?
No, you had said 31%.
I said 31. That's of our general. If you look at our general fund revenue, but if you look at our total revenue, including the other funds, I just want to make sure I give you all the right percentage. The 1.1 million is the right number. We were discussing the correct number.
Okay, does anyone else want to add anything? If not, we'll go on to our third item.
Can the budget committee excuse themselves at this point? Kaylin and Jeff and I?
Yeah, I just want to thank y'all for being here, and it's really a productive meeting. I think it's great y'all were here. Thank you.
Jimmy, thanks for adding it to the agenda.
No problem, Tommy. I got somebody's opinion that it probably should be discussed, and I value that opinion and went ahead and did it. So, all right.
Thanks,
Jason,
Kaylin. Thanks,
ask you a
Jeff.
question. Yes, you can be excused, or you can stay around. You like whatever you like.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Kaylin.
Okay. We'll go on now to a discussion of the town administrator applicants. A couple of weeks ago, I believe we had we interviewed with Mark, Keith, and John, I believe we did that. And ultimately, the staff reviewed, got look at the interviews that we had. And I don't know what opinion y'all got, but the opinions I got is that maybe the staff wasn't too happy with the 3 applicants that we had. And that's important that the staff be satisfied with whoever we pick. I have got 3, I think Monteith has given me 3 new applicants that we can review, or we can talk about anybody else you want to. I'll leave the floor open, and y'all can say whatever you like.
I think I talked with the staff about their thoughts, and of the applicants, I got the feel that they weren't unhappy with the first 2 applicants.
Yeah.
They could live with it, either one of them, but they also, the feeling was just, when you know that somebody's going to be great, they're like, it could be good, but let's see if there's anybody else out there. I know that one of the newest applicants we have is Donald, the town planner, and that's a great possibility. I'd definitely like the chance to interview Donald along with some of so I lean more towards keeping the search open and looking at these new applicants, including Donald as well.
Okay. Tommy?
I agree.
Agrees?
I agree with Wendy. And
okay. That'll make it simple. Larry, how you feel? Larry? You're muted, Larry. We can't hear you.
I'll get used to these buttons eventually. No, I like Wendy. I listened to them and listened to the interviews afterwards, and I'm in agreement that, let's move on and find somebody that y'all like.
Okay, Monte, you gave me 3 applicants. Can you set up interviews with those 3?
Yes, I can do that.
Is
Did you all
Donald
like?
And include Donald if you
Okay.
don't mind.
Okay, I can do that.
Okay, I think that's a good approach, and out of the 3 that we interviewed, I could have picked one, but let's move forward and try to find somebody else.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you this, just listening to the interviews, the one that I liked, let's just say that when it came his turn to interview, he kind of just the floor fell out from underneath him with the way he carried on in some of his answers. It gave the wrong impression.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think we all agree.
It did really help to have the staff interview. The staff did a great job, and having the 2 interviews, like even just hearing how they answer some of the same questions back to back was super helpful.
Would it be better to have the staff interview them first? Do we need to reverse the process?
Yes.
I don't think so. I think we're more qualified to take whatever candidates to the staff. I think we're more qualified. They could cut out somebody that I have confidence in staff, but they could cut out somebody that and let us be led with their opinion going into our interviews. I think going to interviews first would work.
I don't know about the qualified. I'm 0 for 2, and everybody on here is at least 0 for 1. So
yeah.
Good point.
I'd like to add, I did really like the last 3 candidates, and specifically 2. And if we end up with one of those candidates, I will be absolutely thrilled. But no one felt like the perfect candidate for Nolensville, and that's why I want to keep it open.
We will not find the perfect candidate.
And when I said,
I thought at least one of them would work.
yeah, I think I would agree with that. And when I say I think the staff should interview first, not with the idea that they would cut anybody out, more that they've already talked to the person. I'm okay though with like having them do it after us. It's not really a big deal either way, so that works for me.
And we could also watch the interview that the staff does, like we did last time.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Hey,
can do
what-
that.
I watched the last the interviews with the staff, and I tell you what, I learned more during that part than I did when we was actually talking to them face on, because you learn more about them with the staff talking to them.
And if the staff talks to them first, then it gives us more questions to think of, more questions to ask. Is what I'm trying to say.
Well, it's no, like Wendy said, it's no big deal with me, but I would prefer to have it first, but I'll go on with what she suggested. Monique, I got it. Monteek, when you set up the interviews, you can set them up as staff if you want, include Donald, and we'll just take it from there. Is that okay? Everybody happy with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any other things anyone wants to throw out? There being none, we'll just adjourn this special meeting tonight, right now. Okay? See y'all
Thank you.
later.
Good night.
Can I
Good night.
Wendy, who has a class at 9